The sharp crack of a pistol shot pierced the dawn silence of Willow Creek, announcing the arrival of trouble long before Beaumont Nash could see it from his cabin window. It was 1875, and while the West was supposedly growing tamer, some corners of Wyoming territory still clung fiercely to their wildness. Beau's remote ranch was one such place, chosen deliberately for its isolation after he'd seen enough of humanity during the war. Beau snatched his Winchester from above the door, his calloused hands moving with practiced efficiency. At 32, he'd long since traded the recklessness of youth for the cautious vigilance of a man who knew how quickly life could end. Another shot rang out, closer this time. He positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. 3 riders appeared over the ridge, their horses pushing hard. Behind them, a larger group followed in pursuit. Beau cursed under his breath. Other men's problems had a way of becoming his when they crossed his land. The lead rider was listing in the saddle, clearly wounded. As they drew closer, Beau realized with surprise that it was a woman, her dark hair streaming behind her. The 2 men flanking her were firing back at the pursuers. "Get to the barn." She shouted to her companions as they approached Beau's cabin. Beau had no intention of inviting this trouble onto his property, but before he could warn them off, the pursuing riders opened fire again. A bullet splintered his window frame, making his decision for him. He stepped onto the porch, leveled his rifle, and fired 2 warning shots over the heads of the pursuers. "That's far enough," he bellowed. "You're on Nash property now." The chase party reined in their horses, a group of 7 rough-looking men who seemed to be weighing their chances. Their leader, a heavyset man with a bushy beard, spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Hand over the woman and her friends, Nash. This ain't your fight." "Don't know what fight it is and don't care," Beau called back. "But nobody crosses my land hunting people without my say-so." "State your business proper or turn around." The wounded woman and her companions had reached the relative safety of Beau's barn. He could feel her eyes on him from the shadows of the open doorway. "That woman and her friends robbed my establishment," the bearded man shouted. "We're bringing them to justice." "If it's justice you're after, ride to the marshal in Copper Springs," Beau replied evenly, not lowering his rifle. "Or file your complaint when the circuit judge comes through next month." The leader's face darkened. "We handle things our own way out here." "Not on my land," Beau said coldly, his finger tensed on the trigger. "I won't tell you again." For a tense moment, the only sound was the snorting of horses and the wind rustling through the grass. Then the bearded man jerked his head and his party reluctantly wheeled their mounts around. "This isn't over, Nash," he called over his shoulder. "Those thieves have to come out sometime." Beau watched until they disappeared over the ridge before lowering his rifle. Only then did he turn toward the barn, irritation rising in his chest. He hadn't fired those shots out of charity merely to keep bloodshed off his property. Now he had uninvited guests to deal with. The woman emerged from the barn shadows, clutching her bloodied arm. Despite her injury, she stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. She had striking features, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Nash," she said, her voice steady despite her pallor. "I'm Zephyra Collins. My friends are Daniel Owens and Theo Miller." Beau ignored the introduction. "You've brought trouble to my door. I don't appreciate that." "Neither did we appreciate being robbed and then accused of theft when we demanded our money back," she replied coolly. The man called Daniel stepped forward. "It's true. Barnaby runs a crooked gambling hall in Copper Springs. When we called him on his cheating, his men beat us and took our belongings. We simply reclaimed what was ours." Beau's jaw tightened. "Not my concern. You need to move on as soon as you're able." Zephyra swayed slightly, the blood loss evidently taking its toll. "My arm needs tending first." "A bullet grazed me." Despite his better judgment, Beau couldn't send an injured woman back into danger. "Fine, come inside. I'll see to your wound, then you all need to clear out by morning." Inside his cabin, Beau directed Zephyra to sit at his rough-hewn table while he gathered supplies. Her companions waited anxiously nearby. "How bad is it?" Theo asked. "I've had worse," she answered with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Beau cut away the sleeve of her blouse to reveal an angry furrow across her upper arm. "Clean shot through the flesh," he muttered. "Lucky." I make my own luck, Mr. Nash, she replied. As he cleaned and bandaged her wound, Beau studied her surreptitiously. Unlike most women he encountered in these parts, Zephyra Collins didn't seem fragile or frightened. Her hands, though smaller and more delicate than his own, showed calluses that spoke of hard work. Her clothing was practical trousers, boots, and a man's shirt that had been altered to fit her frame. "What brings you to this part of Wyoming?" he asked despite himself. "Work," she answered simply. "I'm a horse trainer. Daniel and Theo are my business partners. We're establishing a breeding operation near Silverton." Beau raised an eyebrow. Horse training was unusual work for a woman, but he'd learned long ago that the frontier attracted those who didn't fit neatly into society's expectations. "Silverton's 3 days' ride from here," he observed. Daniel nodded. "We came to Copper Springs to sell a stallion, thought we'd enjoy a night in town before heading back." He laughed bitterly. "That was a mistake." Beau finished bandaging Zephyra's arm in silence. When he was done, he stood and moved to the stove. "You might as well eat something before you go," he said grudgingly. "I have stew." "That's very kind," Zephyra said. "It's not kindness. You won't get far if you're weak from hunger." While the stew heated, Beau's wolfhound, Scout, emerged from his spot by the fireplace to investigate the strangers. The massive dog approached Zephyra cautiously, sniffing at her boots. "Hello there," she murmured, offering her uninjured hand for inspection. To Beau's surprise, Scout allowed her to scratch behind his ears, unusual behavior for the typically wary animal. "He doesn't normally take to strangers," Beau commented. "Animals know who they can trust," she replied, meeting his gaze evenly. The meal passed in relative silence, broken only by necessary conversation. As night fell, Beau reluctantly acknowledged that sending them away in darkness would be tantamount to delivering them to Barnaby's men, who were almost certainly waiting somewhere beyond his property line. "You can sleep in the barn tonight," he conceded, "but I want you gone at first light." Before dawn the next morning, Beau was already awake and dressed when he heard a commotion outside. Grabbing his rifle, he hurried to the door, expecting to find Barnaby's men returned. Instead, he discovered Zephyra in his corral, working with his most troublesome mare, a spirited chestnut that had thrown him twice the previous week. He watched in amazement as she moved calmly around the nervous horse, speaking in low tones he couldn't quite hear. The mare's ears flicked forward with interest rather than lying flat against her head in defiance. "What do you think you're doing?" he called out, striding toward the corral. Zephyra glanced over her shoulder. "Earning my keep. This mare has potential, but she's been mishandled." "I didn't ask for your help," Beau said, irritated by her presumption. "No, but you provided shelter and medical attention. I pay my debts." She turned back to the horse. "She's afraid of men, especially those approaching from her right side." "Someone struck her there repeatedly. See how she flinches." Beau did see it now that she pointed it out. The mare shied away whenever he moved to her right, something he'd attributed to simple orneriness. "I bought her from a man passing through last month," he admitted. "Got her cheap because she was supposedly unbreakable." Zephyra made a disapproving sound. "Not unbreakable, just broken in the wrong ways." She stroked the mare's neck. "She needs gentling, not breaking." Despite himself, Beau was impressed by her easy way with the animal. "Where'd you learn to work horses like that?" "My father raised horses in Missouri. I grew up in the stables." Daniel and Theo emerged from the barn, looking rested despite their makeshift accommodations. "We should get moving, Zeph," Daniel said. "Barnaby's men could return with reinforcements." Zephyra nodded reluctantly and gave the mare a final pat. "Approach her from the left for a while. Speak before you touch her. She'll come around." As they prepared to leave, Beau found himself in the unusual position of not wanting guests to depart. "Those men could still be watching the trails," he said. "Might be safer to wait another day." The three exchanged glances, clearly surprised by his change of heart. "We don't want to impose," Zephyra said carefully. "It's not an imposition if you make yourselves useful," Beau replied gruffly. "I've got fence lines that need mending and horses that could use work. Consider it payment for the trouble you've brought me." And so began an arrangement that Beau initially intended to last only a day or two. Zephyra and her companions proved to be hard workers and knowledgeable about ranch operations. Daniel was skilled with carpentry and helped repair Beau's weathered barn. Theo revealed a talent for cooking that put Beau's basic fare to shame, but it was Zephyra who caught Beau's attention most. Her understanding of horses bordered on supernatural. Within days, she had the chestnut mare eating from her hand and accepting a saddle without protest. "You could sell her for 10 times what you paid once she's properly trained," she told him on their third evening as they watched the sunset from his porch. "I didn't buy her to sell," Beau replied. "I need a good riding horse. Then you'll have one with time and patience." A comfortable silence fell between them. It had been years since Beau had shared his space with anyone, yet Zephyra's presence felt strangely unobtrusive. She seemed to sense when he needed solitude and never pushed for conversation. On their 5th day at the ranch, Beau returned from checking his cattle to find Zephyra alone in the cabin, reading one of his books by the fire. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, still damp from washing, and she changed into a simple blue dress that he hadn't seen before. She looked up and smiled. "Daniel and Theo rode into town to scout if it's safe for us to travel. They should be back by nightfall." Beau nodded, suddenly aware of how different his cabin felt with her in it. What had once seemed adequate now struck him as sparse and uninviting. The walls that had been silent companions for years now seemed to hold their breath, waiting. "You like Thoreau?" he asked, gesturing to the book in her hands. "I do. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," she quoted. "I understand that sentiment." "Most people don't," Beau said, removing his hat and hanging it on its peg by the door. "They think being alone means being lonely." "There's a difference between solitude and isolation," Zephyra replied, closing the book. "One's a choice, the other's a prison." The insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Beau had told himself for years that his isolation was a choice, but in moments of honesty, he recognized it for what it was, a fortress built from fear of loss. That evening, when Daniel and Theo returned with news that Barnaby's men had been called away to deal with cattle rustlers further north, Beau found himself unaccountably disappointed. "So I suppose you'll be leaving tomorrow," he said, trying to sound indifferent. Zephyra exchanged looks with her companions before responding. "Actually, if your offer of work still stands, we thought we might stay a bit longer. The stallion we sold fetched a good price, but we need more capital before we can properly establish our breeding operation." "And frankly, your place needs a lot of work," Theo added with a grin. "Those fence lines are just the beginning." Beau should have been offended, but instead he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "I can pay fair wages," he said, "and you can continue to use the barn for lodging." "I was thinking," Daniel said hesitantly, "there's that old trapper's cabin about a quarter-mile south. With some repairs, it could be habitable for me and Theo. Leaving the barn for the horses, as it should be," Zephyra added. "I can make do with a corner of your loft, if that's acceptable." "I don't take up much space." Beau considered the proposal. Having Zephyra sleeping under his roof stirred complicated feelings, but the arrangement made practical sense. "That's fine," he agreed, perhaps too quickly. The days began to develop a rhythm. Mornings found them all working with the horses or tending to ranch chores. Afternoons, Beau often rode out to check his cattle or hunt, sometimes accompanied by Zephyra, whose skill with a rifle matched her way with horses. Evenings were spent in conversation around the fire or in comfortable silence, as Zephyra read and Beau whittled or repaired tack. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the barriers Beau had constructed around himself began to crumble. He found himself sharing stories of his time fighting in the war, tales he'd told no one else. Zephyra listened without judgment, sometimes offering stories of her own, of growing up with 4 brothers, of losing her mother to influenza, of striking out on her own when her father remarried a woman who saw no place for her in the family business. "My stepmother believed a woman's place was in the home," she explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass. "When I insisted on continuing to train horses, she gave my father an ultimatum, her or me. And he chose her," Beau guessed softly. Zephyra nodded, her profile sharp against the fading light. He didn't see it as choosing her over me. He thought I would eventually come to my senses and accept the life she wanted for me, but I couldn't pretend to be someone I'm not. So you left. So I left, she agreed. With nothing but my saddle and my father's old training manuals, met Daniel and Theo in Kansas City. They had dreams but no knowledge of horses. I had knowledge but no money. It seemed like a natural partnership. Are you and Daniel? Bo left the question unfinished, feeling foolish for asking but needing to know. Zephyra laughed, a warm sound that stirred something in Bo's chest. No, nothing like that. Daniel and Theo are devoted to each other. They're partners in every sense. Oh, Bo said, understanding dawning. Such arrangements weren't uncommon in the territories, though rarely spoken of directly. They've been good friends to me, Zephyra continued. Like the brothers I left behind, but better in some ways. They see me for who I am, not who they think I should be. As June melted into July, the old trapper's cabin was repaired and Daniel and Theo moved in, giving everyone more space. The chestnut mare now named Ember by Zephyra progressed in her training until Bo could ride her without incident. The garden behind the cabin, neglected for years, was reclaimed from weeds and replanted with vegetables. For the first time since establishing his ranch, Bo began to think beyond mere survival. He found himself considering improvements to the cabin, additions that would make it more comfortable. More like a home than a shelter. One sweltering afternoon, he returned from Copper Springs with supplies to find Zephyra swimming in the creek that ran through his property. For a moment, he stood transfixed. Her wet hair clung to her shoulders and her skin glistened in the sunlight. She hadn't seen him yet, giving him a chance to withdraw to respect her privacy. Instead, he cleared his throat loudly. Zephyra spun in the water, momentarily startled, then relaxed when she saw him. "You're back early," she called. "Male coach was ahead of schedule," he replied, averting his eyes. "I'll let you finish your swim." "No need to leave on my account," she said. "The water's perfect. You look like you could use cooling off after your ride." She was right, he was dusty and sweating from the journey to town. Still, propriety suggested he should decline. "I'm decent," she added, seeming to read his thoughts. "I'm wearing my chemise." The thin undergarment clung to her form, revealing more than it concealed, but Bo found himself drawn to the creek nonetheless. He tied his horse to a nearby tree and removed his boots and shirt before wading into the water in his trousers. The coolness was instant relief from the July heat. Zephyra floated nearby, her hair spreading around her like dark seaweed. "Isn't this better than broiling in that cabin?" she asked. "Considerably," Bo admitted. He ducked his head underwater, scrubbing trail dust from his hair and beard. When he surfaced, Zephyra was watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious of the scars that marked his chest and shoulder. "Nothing," she replied, looking away. "It's just nice to see you relaxed for once." Bo realized she was right, he had been relaxed, without even thinking about it. The constant vigilance that had been his companion for years had eased in her presence. "I'm not always wound tight," he protested mildly. "No," she arched an eyebrow. "The first time I met you, I thought your jaw might shatter from clenching it so hard." Bo laughed despite himself. "I had strangers bringing trouble to my door, seemed like a reasonable response. And now?" She asked softly. "Now I'm swimming in my creek on a hot day," he replied. "With a woman who's proven herself to be considerably less trouble than expected. High praise indeed from Beaumont Nash," she teased, splashing water in his direction. He retaliated, sending a wave her way that she dodged with a laugh. For a few minutes they behaved like children, splashing and diving until both were breathless. When they finally emerged from the creek, Bo felt lighter than he had in years. They sat on the bank, letting the sun dry them, talking about nothing important as clouds drifted overhead. It was in that moment, watching Zephyra wring water from her hair, that Bo realized he was in dangerous territory. This woman who had arrived like a storm on his doorstep had somehow slipped past his defenses. That night, after a supper shared with Daniel and Theo, Zephyra and Bo sat on the porch as had become their custom. The air between them felt charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "I got a letter in town today," Bo said finally, breaking the silence, "from my brother in Denver." I didn't know you had a brother, Zephyra replied. We're not close, haven't seen each other in 8 years. Bo stared out at the darkness. He wants me to visit. Says he's getting married and wants family there. Are you going to go? Bo hadn't decided until that moment. I thought I might, and I thought, that is, if you're interested, you and Daniel and Theo could watch the place while I'm gone. Zephyra was quiet for so long that Bo began to regret the offer, but when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than dismissive. We could do that, she said slowly. Or, Bo prompted when she didn't continue, or I could go with you. She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the lantern light. Daniel and Theo are more than capable of managing things here for a week or two. The idea of Zephyra accompanying him to Denver stirred a mix of emotions: excitement, apprehension, hope. Why would you want to come? He asked. Because you shouldn't have to face your past alone, she answered simply, and because I'd like to see more of the world beyond these hills, even if it's just Denver. There was more to it than that, Bo suspected, but he didn't press. It's a long journey, he warned. 4 days by horseback at least. I'm not afraid of long journeys, she replied with a smile, and so it was decided. They would leave in a week, traveling together to Denver for Benjamin Nash's wedding. The prospect filled Bo with equal parts dread and anticipation: dread at facing the brother he'd parted from bitterly, anticipation at the thought of days on the trail with Zephyra. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool. They set out at first light, Bo on Ember and Zephyra on her own horse, a sleek black gelding named Shadow. Daniel and Theo stood in the yard to see them off, extracting promises to return with stories and perhaps some supplies unavailable in Copper Springs. The first day's ride passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily between them. They made camp that night beneath a stand of pines, sharing a meal of trail bread and jerky before rolling into their separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Bo lay awake long after Zephyra's breathing had steadied into sleep, watching the stars through the branches overhead. There had been women in his life before, brief encounters in town that satisfied physical needs without touching deeper emotions. But Zephyra was different. She challenged him, surprised him, made him question the solitary existence he'd built. The journey continued without incident until the third day, when they encountered a group of riders heading the opposite direction. Bo's hand instinctively moved to his holster when he saw there were 6 of them, all men with the hard look of those who lived by dubious means. "Afternoon," the leader called as they approached. "Fine day for traveling." "That it is," Bo replied neutrally, positioning his horse slightly in front of Zephyra's. "You fellows heading to Copper Springs? Eventually. We're in no rush." The man's eyes lingered on Zephyra, taking in her riding clothes and the rifle secured to her saddle. "Don't often see a lady on these trails. Just passing through," Zephyra said coolly. "Like yourselves." One of the other riders, a thin man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned forward. "Say, ain't you the woman who caused trouble for Barnaby back in June with those 2 fellas?" Bo tensed, prepared for trouble, but Zephyra merely raised her eyebrows. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. My husband and I have been ranching near Cheyenne for years. This is our first trip this way." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that even Bo almost believed it. The word husband sent an unexpected jolt through his chest. The scarred man seemed unconvinced, but the leader shook his head. "Let's not delay these good people, Harley. We've got ground to cover before sundown." With a nod to Bo and Zephyra, he led his men past. Bo kept his hand near his gun until they were well out of sight. "Quick thinking," he said once they were alone again. "Though if they're headed to Copper Springs, they'll learn soon enough there's no Nash Ranch near Cheyenne. By then, we'll be in Denver," Zephyra replied with a shrug. "And on our return, we'll take the northern route as we planned." Bo studied her, impressed by her calm handling of the situation. "You've done this before, haven't you? Talked your way out of trouble." "A woman traveling in these territories learns to be resourceful," she said. "Not everyone respects a female horse trainer, but most men will think twice before crossing another man's wife." "Is that why you're not married?" Bo asked. "To preserve your independence," Zephyra laughed softly. I'm not married because I haven't met a man who sees me as an equal, not a possession. She glanced at him. Until recently, perhaps. The admission hung in the air between them, neither willing to pursue it further just yet. That night they camped in a sheltered valley beside a small stream. The earlier encounter had left them both on edge, and they agreed to take watches through the night. Beau insisted on taking the first shift, allowing Zephyra to rest. As she prepared her bedroll, Zephyra paused and looked up at him. "Thank you for not contradicting my story back there," she said. Some men would have been uncomfortable with the deception. "It was the right call," Beau replied, "though I'm not sure I look the part of a respectable husband." Zephyra's eyes traveled over his bearded face and worn clothing. "You look exactly like what you are, a man capable of protecting what's his." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary before slipping into her bedroll. "Wake me for second watch." During his watch, Beau found his thoughts returning to Zephyra's words, "What's his?" The possessive phrase stirred something primal in him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until now. Somehow, this woman who had arrived unannounced at his door had become precious to him. When the time came to wake her for her watch, Beau was reluctant to disturb her peaceful sleep. He gently touched her shoulder and she woke instantly, alert and reaching for her knife. "Easy," he murmured. "It's just me." She relaxed, sitting up and pushing her hair from her face. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, almost otherworldly. "All quiet?" she asked, "as a church on Monday." Beau settled onto his own bedroll. "Wake me if anything moves out there." "I will," she promised, moving to sit by the fire. "Sleep well, Beau." He closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him. From beneath half-closed lids, he watched Zephyra as she kept her vigil. She sat with her back straight, rifle across her knees, occasionally adding small branches to the fire. There was something deeply comforting about her presence, steady, reliable, undemanding. They reached Denver late the following afternoon, the city sprawling before them in a jumble of buildings and activity that made Beau immediately uneasy. It had been years since he'd been in a place with so many people, and the noise and commotion set his teeth on edge. "Where does your brother live?" Zephyra asked as they rode down the main thoroughfare. Beau consulted the letter he'd kept in his jacket pocket. "He's got a place on the north side. Apparently, he's done well for himself in banking." Benjamin's house proved to be a grand affair with a manicured lawn and a wrought iron fence. Beau felt increasingly out of place as they approached, aware of his trail-worn clothing and dusty boots. "Maybe this was a mistake," he muttered. Zephyra reached over to squeeze his arm. "Family is never a mistake, even when it's complicated." Before Beau could respond, the front door opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Benjamin Nash had the same tall build as his older brother, but his clean-shaven face and tailored suit created a stark contrast to Beau's rugged appearance. "Beaumont," he called, disbelief and pleasure mingling in his voice. "You actually came." Beau dismounted and approached the porch, suddenly uncertain. 8 years was a long time, and they had parted with harsh words neither had ever apologized for. "Hello, Ben," he said stiffly. Benjamin rushed down the steps and, to Beau's surprise, embraced him tightly. "I didn't think you'd really come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not after, well, everything." Beau awkwardly returned the embrace, catching Zephyra's encouraging smile over his brother's shoulder. When they separated, Benjamin noticed her for the first time. "And who is this?" he asked, his eyes widening in surprise. "Zephyra Collins," Beau said. "She's my—" He hesitated, unsure how to define their relationship. "I work with Beau," Zephyra supplied, dismounting gracefully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Nash. Please call me Benjamin," he replied, taking her offered hand. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome in my home. Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted after your journey." The interior of Benjamin's home was as impressive as the exterior, with polished wood floors and elegant furnishings that made Beau acutely aware of the gulf that had grown between their lives. A maid appeared to take their hats and coats, and Benjamin led them to a sitting room where refreshments awaited. "Olivia will be sorry she missed your arrival," Benjamin said, pouring coffee for his guests. "She's with her mother making final arrangements for the wedding." "She's been eager to meet you, Beau. How did you meet her?" Beau asked, trying for conversation despite his discomfort. Benjamin's face softened. At the library. She's a teacher at the girls' school. I was researching an investment. She was helping a student. I kept finding excuses to return until she finally agreed to have dinner with me. His obvious affection for his fiancée eased some of Beau's tension. Whatever their differences, his brother had found happiness. "I'm glad for you, Ben," he said sincerely. Benjamin looked momentarily taken aback, then smiled. "That means a great deal coming from you." He turned to Zephyra. "My brother was always the principled one. His approval isn't easily won." "I've noticed," Zephyra replied with a small smile. They spent the evening catching up, the years of silence between the brothers gradually giving way to cautious conversation. Benjamin had questions about the ranch, and Beau found himself speaking more than he had in months as he described his life in Wyoming. When Benjamin showed them to their rooms, separate chambers connected by a shared sitting room, a concession to propriety that assumed more between them than existed, Zephyra lingered in the doorway of Beau's room. "See, not so terrible," she said softly. Beau sank onto the edge of the bed, running a hand through his beard. "He's changed," he admitted. "Or maybe I have. People grow. That's what life is." She stepped closer. "What happened between you, if you don't mind me asking?" Beau was silent for a long moment. "After our parents died, I enlisted to fight in the war. Ben was too young to go. I left him with our uncle and promised I'd come back." His voice tightened. "I did come back, but I wasn't the same. The things I'd seen done, I couldn't settle back into normal life." "So you went west," Zephyra guessed. Beau nodded. "Ben wanted to come with me, but I refused, said he should finish his schooling, make something of himself. He accused me of abandoning him twice, once for the war, once for the frontier." He sighed heavily. "He wasn't entirely wrong." "And yet he invited you to his wedding," Zephyra pointed out. "He wants to mend things." "Seems so," Beau agreed. "I just don't know if I remember how to be a brother anymore." Zephyra smiled softly. "From what I've seen tonight, you're doing just fine." The next few days passed in a whirl of activity as the wedding approached. Beau was introduced to Olivia, a quiet, intelligent woman whose gentle nature seemed perfectly suited to Benjamin's enthusiasm. The brothers spent time together, carefully rebuilding the bond that had been broken years before. To Beau's surprise, Zephyra integrated seamlessly into the pre-wedding celebrations, charming Benjamin's friends and offering practical assistance to Olivia. Her adaptability reminded him yet again of how remarkable she was. The night before the wedding, Benjamin hosted a dinner for family and the wedding party. Beau found himself seated beside Zephyra, watching as she conversed easily with Denver's elite despite her frontier background. "Your friend is quite extraordinary," Benjamin murmured when they had a moment alone. "Where did you find her?" "She found me," Beau replied honestly. "Rode onto my property with trouble on her heels and never really left." Benjamin studied him thoughtfully. "She means something to you." It wasn't a question, but Beau answered anyway. "She does." "Does she know that?" Beau glanced across the room to where Zephyra stood talking with Olivia. "I haven't told her in words." "Some things need words, brother," Benjamin said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Trust me on that." The wedding itself was a simple but elegant affair held in the garden of Benjamin and Olivia's home. Beau stood proudly as his brother's best man, watching as Benjamin pledged his life to the woman he loved. From his position near the front, Beau could see Zephyra among the guests, her face softened by the emotions of the moment. During the celebration afterward, Beau found himself drawn to her side. She wore a dress borrowed from Olivia Green's silk that brought out the gray of her eyes and complemented her dark hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style he'd never seen before. "You look different," he said when he reached her. Zephyra laughed. "Is that a compliment or an observation?" "Both," Beau replied. "You look beautiful, but I think I prefer you in riding clothes with your hair down." "So do I," she admitted, touching the unfamiliar arrangement. "This pins and pulls in all the wrong places." A string quartet began to play, and couples moved to the center of the garden to dance. Benjamin and Olivia led, their faces alight with happiness. "Would you care to dance?" Beau asked impulsively, offering his hand. Zephyra looked surprised. "You dance?" "Not for years," he admitted. "But I remember the steps." My mother insisted we learn properly. She placed her hand in his. Then yes, I would like to dance. He led her to join the other couples, placing his hand respectfully at her waist. The last time he had danced had been before the war, at a country social where young men and women had whirled around a barn floor to fiddle music. This was more refined, but the fundamental movements returned to him naturally. "You're full of surprises, Beaumont Nash," Zephyra said as they moved together across the garden. "A cowboy who reads Thoreau, quotes Shakespeare and waltzes." "I contain multitudes," he replied, smiling as he recognized her surprise at the literary reference. "Did you think I was just a grumpy hermit with a gun?" "At first," she admitted. "But I learned quickly there was more beneath the surface." Their eyes met and held as they turned with the music. Something unspoken passed between them, understanding, affection, possibility. "Zephyra," Beau began, gathering his courage. When we returned to the ranch, a commotion at the garden entrance interrupted him. A group of men pushed their way into the celebration, led by a heavyset man with a bushy beard that Beau recognized with a jolt. Barnaby. "Sorry to interrupt the festivities," Barnaby called, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden, "but I've business with two of your guests." Benjamin stepped forward, anger evident in his stance. "This is a private celebration. I must ask you to leave immediately." "Not until I get what's mine," Barnaby replied, his gaze fixing on Beau and Zephyra. "Those two and their friends robbed my establishment. I've followed their trail all the way from Copper Springs." The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Beau moved protectively in front of Zephyra, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he wasn't wearing at a wedding. "Whatever grievance you think you have," he said evenly, "this isn't the time or place to address it. Beaumont." Benjamin looked between his brother and the intruders, confusion evident on his face. "What is this about?" Before Beau could answer, Zephyra stepped forward. "This man runs a crooked gambling operation," she said clearly. "He cheated my business partners, then had us beaten when we objected. We took back only what was rightfully ours." Murmurs rippled through the wedding guests. Barnaby's face darkened. "That's a lie," he spat. "They're nothing but thieves." "Actually," came a new voice from the crowd, "Miss Collins is telling the truth." A well-dressed man separated himself from the guests, his bearing suggesting authority. "I'm Judge William Harrington," he said, addressing Barnaby directly. "And I've had reports about your establishment before, Mr. Barnaby. Numerous complaints of cheating, assault, and intimidation." Barnaby paled slightly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I suggest," the judge continued coldly, "that you and your men leave this celebration immediately. If you have a legitimate grievance, bring it to my court on Monday. Otherwise, I recommend you return to Copper Springs before I decide to investigate those complaints more thoroughly." For a tense moment, Barnaby seemed to consider his options. Then, with a look of pure hatred directed at Beau and Zephyra, he gestured to his men. "This isn't over," he growled as they retreated. When they had gone, Benjamin turned to his brother. "It seems you have a story to tell me," he said, his voice tight. The celebration resumed, but a shadow had been cast over the happy day. Later, in Benjamin's study, Beau and Zephyra explained the full situation, how she and her partners had been wronged, how they had sought justice in the only way available to them, and how Barnaby had pursued them to Beau's ranch. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Benjamin asked when they had finished. "Would you have believed that your respectable banker brother was harboring thieves?" Beau countered. Benjamin considered this, then sighed. "Perhaps not, without knowing the circumstances." He looked at Zephyra. "But I can see you're a person of integrity, Miss Collins, even if your methods were unorthodox." "Sometimes frontier justice is the only kind available," she replied simply. "Well, you have the law on your side now," Benjamin assured them. "Judge Harrington is a fair man. If you present your case to him, I'm confident Barnaby will be the one facing consequences." True to Benjamin's prediction, when they met with Judge Harrington the following day, he listened carefully to their account and issued an order prohibiting Barnaby from pursuing any claim against them. Moreover, he promised to send investigators to examine Barnaby's operation in Copper Springs. "It seems your troubles are behind you," Beau remarked as they left the judge's chambers. Thanks to you, Zephyra replied, if you hadn't taken us in that day. If I hadn't, I'd still be a hermit with an unrideable horse and broken fence lines, he said with a wry smile. I got the better end of that bargain. Their return journey to the ranch began 2 days later. Benjamin and Olivia saw them off with warm embraces and extracted promises of future visits. Don't be a stranger, Beau, Benjamin said as they parted. You're always welcome here. And you at the ranch, Beau replied, surprised to find he meant it, though I can't offer the same comforts. Some comforts matter more than others, his brother answered with a meaningful glance at Zephyra. Don't wait too long to recognize what's right in front of you. As they rode away from Denver, taking the northern route home as planned, Beau found himself reflecting on his brother's words. The woman riding beside him had transformed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. What had begun as an unwanted intrusion had become the most important connection in his solitary existence. They camped that night in a meadow dotted with wildflowers, the stars overhead brilliant in the clear mountain air. After they had eaten, Zephyra sat beside Beau near the fire, closer than usual, their shoulders almost touching. Your brother and Olivia seem very happy together, she observed. They do, Beau agreed. I'm glad for him. He deserves that happiness. And what about you? Zephyra asked softly. What do you deserve, Beaumont Nash? Beau stared into the flames, considering her question. For a long time, I thought isolation was what I deserved. Punishment for surviving when others didn't. He turned to face her. I'm not so sure anymore. What changed your mind? She asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. You, he said simply. You rode into my life and showed me that solitude is a choice, not a sentence. He reached out hesitantly, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've grown accustomed to your company, Miss Collins. Zephyra smiled, leaning slightly into his touch. Just accustomed, more than accustomed, Beau admitted. I've come to depend on it, to need it. He paused, gathering his courage. To need you. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Zephyra's eyes, reflecting the firelight, searched his face. I didn't plan to stay when we first arrived, she said. It was meant to be temporary shelter until we could safely continue our journey. And now, Beau asked, his heart pounding in his chest, now I can't imagine being anywhere else. She reached up to touch his bearded cheek. You've become my home, Beaumont Nash, not your ranch, not your cabin. You. The distance between them disappeared as Beau leaned forward to kiss her. Her lips were soft beneath his, yielding yet demanding in equal measure. Her hands moved to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, both breathless, Beau pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he whispered. I think I have since that day I found you working with Ember in the corral, Zephyra laughed softly. And here I thought it was my expert fence mending that won your heart. That too, he admitted with a smile. You're the most capable woman I've ever known. And you're the most honorable man I've ever known, she replied, even when you're being stubborn and gruff. They spent the night beneath the stars, talking of the future, making plans that would have seemed impossible to Beau just months before. They would expand the ranch, combining their skills to breed and train horses. Daniel and Theo would be partners in the venture, their carpentry and cooking talents valuable additions to the operation. We could build a proper house, Beau suggested as they lay side by side, watching dawn break over the eastern horizon. Something bigger than the cabin, with a real kitchen and bedrooms for everyone. I like your cabin, Zephyra protested mildly. It has character. It has drafts and a leaking roof, Beau corrected, and not nearly enough room for a family. The implication in his words was clear. Zephyra propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Is that a proposal, Mr. Nash? Beau met her gaze steadily. It is if you want it to be. Ask me properly, she challenged, her eyes sparkling, so I can answer properly. Beau sat up, taking her hands in his. Zephyra Collins, will you marry me? Build a life with me on that remote piece of Wyoming that's suddenly not nearly remote enough now that I want to keep you there forever. Her smile was radiant as she nodded. Yes, Beaumont Nash, I will marry you. Though I expect you to dance with me at least once a year, since I now know you can. Their return to the ranch 3 days later was met with excitement from Daniel and Theo, who had managed the property perfectly in their absence. The news of the engagement was celebrated with the best meal Theo could prepare, and a bottle of whiskey Beau had been saving for a special occasion. As summer turned to fall, the ranch transformed. The old trapper's cabin was expanded to provide comfortable quarters for Daniel and Theo. A new stable was constructed to house the growing herd of horses, many purchased with the proceeds from the sale of Beau's cattle, which he had decided to reduce in favor of focusing on horse breeding. Construction began on a new house not far from the original cabin, with Benjamin sending materials and workers from Denver to speed the process. By the time the first snow fell, the main structure was complete, though the interior would require work throughout the winter. Zephyra and Beau were married on a crisp October afternoon, with Judge Harrington riding out from Copper Springs to perform the ceremony. Benjamin and Olivia traveled from Denver, bringing furnishings for the new house as a wedding gift. The celebration was small but joyful, with neighbors from miles around gathering to witness the union of the once solitary rancher and the woman who had broken through his defenses. As winter settled over the Wyoming landscape, Beau found himself marveling at how completely his life had changed in the span of a few months. The cabin that had once echoed with silence now resonated with Zephyra's laughter, with conversation and music and the comforting sounds of shared existence. On a snowy evening in December, as they sat before the fire in the cabin they would soon leave for their new home, Beau pulled Zephyra close against his side. "I realized something today," he said, his voice thoughtful. "What's that?" she asked, nestling her head against his shoulder. "I never invited you to stay," he said. "That first day or any day after, you just stayed, and somehow that changed everything." Zephyra smiled up at him. "You didn't need to invite me," she said softly. "I was already where I belonged. It just took you a while to notice I'd been there every day." Beau kissed her gently, grateful beyond words for the woman who had ridden into his life and refused to ride back out. "I notice now," he promised, "and I'll notice every day for the rest of our lives." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting golden light over the two people who had found in each other something neither had expected: a home that wasn't a place but a person, a belonging that transcended buildings and boundaries. A love that had begun with an uninvited arrival and would continue day after day through all the seasons of their lives together.